Lucy's Kitchen, it's Lucy's Kitchen. She's Lucy and she's got a kitchen. Lucy's Kitchen.
And now that we've got your attention, let's cook. Hi there. Welcome to Lucy's Kitchen. I'm Lucy, and this is my kitchen. Today we're going to make Grandma's cinnamon rolls. This recipe was passed on to me from my mother-in-law, Lucy, another Lucy. So you get double Lucy today. My mother-in-law actually probably learned this from her mother and maybe even from her grandmother. It's an old family recipe that goes all the way back to days in the West in South Dakota. I think you're going to love making them. They're really easy and they're so delicious that you could eat the whole panful yourself. It makes 2 panfuls, so that's a good thing. We're going to start today with our scalded milk. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we scald milk. So I used to think it was a step that we didn't need to take, but I found out that when you scald milk, it actually tones down all of these proteins that can prevent breads and rolls from rising. So by scalding the milk and then cooling it to lukewarm, you ensure that it doesn't interfere with any of the rising and the fluffiness that you want in your cinnamon roll. So what we're going to start with is my trusty mixer here, and I'm going to take this off just for convenience sake. Okay, I've got a couple of tablespoons of butter. That's all, just a couple tablespoons. And we've got, a teaspoon of salt and a tablespoon of sugar. So we're going to pour the scalded milk over our butter, sugar, and salt and let them dissolve. And because when you scald milk, you end up getting some solids stuck to your pan, I'm going to scoop them out. It's not that we don't want them. We just want them to be tamed. So just scraping them out of here, and then that's all for now. Put that aside. We're going to let that sit while they dissolve and melt together. In the meantime, we're going to take our yeast, and it's 1 package of yeast, which is about a tablespoon. I buy yeast by the pound, so I don't get it in those little packets. And so it's good to know that 1 packet is about a tablespoon of yeast. I'm going to mix it with a 1/4 cup of warm water and let the yeast start to, it's going to puff a little bit. It will start to proof. And so we want to get it nice and mixed. And perfect. Oh, so you see what happens is it starts to clump. That's okay. One advantage of using dry yeast is that it actually mixes very nicely. We could really throw this in with the flour, but because this recipe is so old, I don't want to veer from it at all. So I'm doing exactly what it says, which is to dissolve the yeast in a 1/4 cup of hot water or warm water, and then add it to the ingredients that are in our mixer. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Perfect. Now add my beater, and then I'm going to just mix this up for a second and let it kind of combine. And if you're brave, you can do it fast. Oh, and you can see the butter and so forth are stuck, but that's okay because we're going to mix our flour in here. And let's see, let me get a scooper. So I'm going to just put about a cup of the flour. There's 3 cups of flour here. I'm going to start with about a cup because we want it to really mix well with the wet ingredients. And that's a little bit more. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that. the advantage of mixing some of it ahead and not all of it is that this allows it to really combine without releasing a lot of gluten. Now, we do want gluten because we want these to rise, but we don't want this to get stiff. So it's just important to know that all of our wet ingredients are mixed beautifully and smoothly with our flour, and then we're going to add the rest of the flour. So that looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to just scrape down the sides and scrape down the blade. Get all that stuff, meaning the beautiful flour along with yeast, a little bit of sugar, scalded milk, and some salt. Now, people say, well, why do we want salt in baked goods? One of the nice things about salt is that it balances the flavor of sugar, but it also has a scientific reason for being in baked goods, which is to keep them from over puffing. And what happens when they over puff is that sometimes they'll just deflate. Now that happens with cakes all the time. We don't have eggs in this, so it won't be as much of a problem, but we do have yeast. And for the same reason of not wanting them to over inflate, the salt will help to regulate that. So now we're ready to put in some more flour. And as soon as this flour is wet, add the second batch. And that is perfect. And that's all of our flour. Now I'm going to let it beat for about a minute. So it's really nicely combined. I'm going to now take my spatula again and scrape down the sides, and you can see it's getting stuck. So I don't want that to fall out of my bowl. And it's kind of a raggedy dough, which is, it shows you that it's just right. Again, we're not making bread here. We're making a cinnamon roll, which is a different thing altogether. So we're not looking for a super well kneaded dough, but we do want it to be very well mixed. Our dough is ready. We're going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on our surface and then just dump it out. It's a beautiful lump. It's nice and soft, and it really doesn't stick. It's got plenty of flour in it. Generally speaking, I just do this as a precaution. So I'm going to push it away a little bit. And now you want it to hold together. And the best thing to do is to make it into a rectangle with your hands. All right, we're going to just go ahead and roll it. Turn it. We're rolling this to about 1/4 inch of thickness. The small amount of dough probably doesn't look like it, but it's going to make 2 dozen of these cinnamon rolls. Now, our cinnamon rolls are more reasonable in size than the commercial ones, which are, you know, you could make this really big if you wanted to, but I highly recommend this size because then you don't have to feel so guilty when you have 2. So our dough is about 20 inches wide about 10 or 11 inches. Actually, well, yes, deep. Okay, now the nice thing about this dough is that even if you don't get it perfect, it would be ideal if we had a perfect rectangle, but the truth is it doesn't matter that much. Now, first we're going to mix our cinnamon, 1 teaspoon with 1/4 cup of sugar. We'll mix that together. We want that to be nice and combined. And there's that. Then we've got our butter. I've got about 5 tablespoons of butter here. We're going to brush this cinnamon roll dough with the butter. You want to get it completely covered on the top. Don't leave any edges unbuttered. Again, we're not using that much butter, but it's still important. We want a little bit more. We want this to be really buttery. And we're going to use some of this butter to butter our pans. We're also going to use some of this butter to dab on top of the rolls after they rise, before they go in the oven. So we have a bit left, and that's going to be just fine. So now we can take our cinnamon sugar and sprinkle it on top. Try to do it a little bit evenly and do it all the way to the edges. Can't hurt. Can't hurt to have cinnamon sugar everywhere. One thing I love about this recipe is that it really doesn't call for much sugar. 1/4 cup plus a tablespoon, and then when we make the glaze, we're going to want to have some powdered sugar, and we don't even use very much of that. So this still makes a beautiful sweet roll. Here's our currants. Same thing, distribute them evenly. Another thing I like about currants is that they're not quite as sweet as raisins can be. And so they make this roll taste very rich and delicious without an overwhelming sweetness. They're still quite sweet, but they're not toothache-y sweet. And that is that. Okay, now comes a tricky part, and this is the part where we really would love it if it was perfect. But since it isn't, well, that's okay. We're going to make do. Just fold the edge over, start it going, and just press it, okay? When you first start, you just need to get it going. So we can just do that. Get this all, a little bit. Make sure the currants are all the way out to the edge. Okay, now you can just roll it and make sure it's a tight roll. Try to keep it even. So in the middle starts getting fatter, just kind of push it out a little bit to the ends. Once we get this all rolled up, we can actually kind of even it out. We want to make sure we have all of this in this tight roll. So, a few currants fell out. Don't want to waste any. Okay, so this roll is now very nice, and it's become much longer than 20 inches. It's now about 24 inches, which is great because we want to cut it in half and get 24 rolls out of this. So what does that mean? That means The rolls are going to be cut at about 1 inch. All right. I have it seam side down just to hold on to it. And we'll just use a cutter and cut straight through. Put one aside. Now before I start cutting these individual rolls, I'm going to butter my pans. And so I like using melted butter because it gives the bottom of the roll kind of a nice crusty edge, which is very pleasant because then there's a soft part and a crunchy part, and they're really tasty. And that's that. Okay, back to our rolls. I'm looking at this one. It is lovely, and I'm just going to keep pressing it out a little bit, and let's measure with my little measuring gadget here, and perfect. So we want to start cutting 1 inch at a time. This is only if you want them to be all the exact same height. Now, I'm a little finicky, so that's me. So the most important part is now. When we put them into our pan, you have to leave a lot of space in between them. I have made these before and made the mistake of putting them in too close, and what happens is that they rise like that and they squish together and they really don't turn out as fluffy and beautiful. So I'm going to space them apart, and I do this by using sort of the clock technique. So I'm just putting them at 12, 6, 9, and 3, and then we take and put them in the same empty spots, and then you take the last ones and put them in the middle. And we repeat with our other pan. Our rolls have been rising for an hour. They've puffed up nicely. You'll notice that they haven't filled the pan yet, and that's because they're going to continue rising in the oven. Now, this is an awful lot of sweet rolls, and I don't have that many people around to eat them. So what I'm going to do is take one of the pans and only par cook it. In other words, I'm going to cook it for partial time. Then I'm going to take it out of the oven, let it cool, cover it with foil, and either refrigerate it or freeze it until I'm ready to finish the cooking and serve it. So it's really a handy thing to do if you're going to be having people over for brunch. You can just pull it out of the freezer and in the morning before when you get up, and then bake it just before everyone sits down at the table. You only have to bake it for about 10 minutes and it's done. So we're going to put them both in the oven, and I will show you what the par cooked ones look like, and then we'll finish cooking the other one and finish putting the glaze on, and then we'll try it. So right now I'm going to take some melted butter. Again, remember we had some left over. I actually added to it a little bit because I didn't think it was really enough. So we got about 1.5 tablespoons of melted butter, and I'm just going to dab it on top of all of our cinnamon rolls. Now this step is optional. I'm doing it because I like the flavor as well as the crispy texture that they get when they bake with a little bit of butter, and also it helps them to brown very nicely. And you notice I'm not slathering it, I'm just tapping it on top with some of the butter, and that's it. All right, into the oven they go. I'll be back in 10 minutes with the par cooked one, and that way I can show you what it looks like, and then we'll bake the rest. These are the partially cooked cinnamon rolls. You can see that they've puffed up quite a bit more. They are deliciously fragrant cinnamon and butter. Great combination. And these are the ones I'm going to save for later. So I'm going to let them cool completely. Then I'm going to cover them with foil, maybe freeze them, maybe refrigerate them, but they're for later on. In the meantime, our other pan of cinnamon rolls is continuing to bake. When it's ready, we'll bring it over and I'll show you how to make an easy glaze that just is the icing on the cake. Our sweet rolls, our cinnamon rolls are done. And look at how beautiful they are. They're very brown. I mean, not very brown. They still need to be tender, so you don't want them to, be hard, but they are browned and they're quite lovely. And compare them to our others, and you'll see, actually, that one's cooled off. You can see the difference. So we're going to let these cool for a few minutes while we make our glaze. We don't want to put the glaze on hot out of the oven cinnamon rolls. We want them to be a little bit cool so the glaze can, pool up and really be yummy. So I'm pushing those away and we're pulling our glaze ingredients. I've got some powdered sugar. I've got a tiny bit of vanilla here. Actually, I've got a lot of vanilla, but I'm only going to use a tiny bit. And I have some milk. So I'm going to just actually I'm going to start with a fork. I'm going to take this fork and I'm going to pour a little bit. This is something that you kind of have to estimate. And I just probably put in a tablespoon of milk in here. And in about 2 seconds, this is going to turn completely liquidy. And it is. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little bit. In fact, I'll use my measuring spoons and just put 1/8 of a teaspoon of vanilla in here. We don't want an overwhelming vanilla flavor. We just want a hint of vanilla. Mix all that together. I'm going to switch to my whisk now that it's all combined. And this way I can make it very, very smooth. And if you like your glaze a little runnier, you can add a little more milk. I like it to be nice and thick. So we're going to glaze our rolls now. And one of the easiest ways, you could use a spoon. I think one of the easiest ways is to use a brush and just glaze the top. Let the glaze kind of drip down on the sides a little bit. I'm not going to glaze the partially cooked ones, of course, because the glaze wouldn't do very well either in the refrigerator or the freezer, especially if you're going to cook them again, which you'd have to. So you wait until they're completely done to glaze them. In fact, you wait until they're done to make the glaze. This glaze, the beauty of it is that it sort of solidifies and gives you a nice glaze crunch on top of these cinnamon rolls. Now for the best part. I'm going to have one of these babies. This one has my name on it. Oh, it's just beautiful. So take a look. You have a nice browned edge because it was up against the pan. You have sort of a soft, gooey inside, which is going to be very tender and wonderful, and the contrast is great. I can tell by the smell that they're really going to be tasty. So here we go. And frankly, most of the time you just want to use your fingers on these. Okay. These are really delicious. They're so sweet, but not too sweet. Cinnamony, a little hint of the vanilla. These would be a perfect addition to a brunch buffet in which you have an egg dish, fruit salad, and cinnamon rolls. Couldn't be better, and you can feed a lot of people with it. Well, That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Lucy's Kitchen. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and join us next time when we share more delicious recipes from my kitchen to yours.